My critique of the United States, unlike Europe and other countries, is that everybody wants to think that they're middle class somehow, the great middle class, which means it fuzzes out that whole issue, and we tend to, I think, conflate race and class.
Hi, and welcome to Solar for All, a podcast at the intersection of clean energy and issues of race, class, justice, and equity. I'm your host, Geoff Greenfield, and all the show notes and other resources, including show notes from this show, are available at solarforall.show, and that's SHOW. With me today is our guest, Ralph Jacobson. Ralph is the founder and, depending on who you ask, Chief Impact Officer, Chief Innovation Officer, or Chief JEDI Officer of IPS. And he started IPS 30 years ago. So he is definitely a solar pioneer and one of the early movers that's still around doing good work. IPS is headquartered in St. Paul, the greater St. Paul area, and Minneapolis, St. Paul area. And Ralph went to the University of Minnesota, where he studied material science in the 80s when solar PV was just coming online. Without further ado, let's talk about some of the things that you've learned over your 30 years of doing solar, and especially at the subject matter that we're talking about here at inclusion, equity, diversity, justice, how some of your experiences over the 30 years and what you're up to right now are kind of overlapping in that space. Thanks for coming on the show, Ralph.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Geoff. I'm delighted to get a chance to talk about the things that I'm passionate about. So I'm pleased to be able to have a conversation with you today.
Yeah. Well, what is your title? I looked at LinkedIn and looked at your email, and you know, we were just talking about Chief JEDI Officer. Do you actually have a business card that says something, or do you go by the title du jour?
You know, my title is the Chief JEDI Officer, and I think it's because the fellow owners of the business really feel that I can do more good in that arena than I can in just corporate innovation, those sorts of things. Because here we are I am anyways in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, St. Paul. This is where George Floyd was murdered last year. We're at the epicenter of this wave of recognition that has gone actually all around the world, that we've got to clean it up in terms of the race issue. And so I feel like my life has given me, at various stages of my life, has given me, let's say, the tools, or at least the interest and awareness to feel like I can contribute something. I guess let's call it the JEDI arena, because it's a good shorthand way of referring to it. Now, I should say that my business card does say JEDI, Chief JEDI Officer, but we have to be careful not to spell it out that way, because if you do, it says Chief Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And of course, many people would get stuck on Chief Justice. What court do you work in? So we have to keep it to JEDI when I put a chief before it. But it is a C-level position in the company. As the founder, I sold the business about a year and a half ago. And so I have a minority position in the business. And it's the one that has the most value for people, because everybody else in the business is involved more in production. As I'm the old geezer, it is a place in my career where I'm fortunate enough to have the other owners of the business and the staff believe that where my passion is where I'm going to contribute the most value.
Yeah, well, it seems like passion is contagious. And, many times folks after 30 years of toil and, riding the solar coaster might go find a beach to sit on somewhere. But sounds like you're still doing what you care a lot about.
Well, you asked about some like background, and having started a business in a technical field, right after getting an engineering degree at the university. 5-10 years ago, I was having fun. Started out as two guys in a truck, and then a few other people, and then a salesperson, and we sort of grew organically. But then I realized maybe 10 years ago that it's a bunch of white guys. I have surrounded myself with a bunch of white guys, which I might have not noticed that, but I grew up in a black neighborhood. And I started to wonder, gee, where are the black people? My grandfather grew up on an Indian reservation. I've always, had an awareness. And at some point, I just started to think, well, my business should reflect a more, let's say, a wider variety of people: women, Native Americans, Black people, Latinx, and then, of course, you kind of have that flash of realization, and then you go, well, okay, where do I turn? Who's putting out graduates? If I've hired people through kind of word of mouth mostly, and word of mouth, I guess, in the solar community 10 years ago didn't really extend very deep into the Black community or Native American communities. And so, as far as figuring out about people in the Black community, so Jemez Staples, Renewable Energy Partners on the north side of Minneapolis, had started coming to the Minnesota Solar Energy Industry Association meetings. Being from the north side of Minneapolis, where part of my growing up was, I kind of felt like, hey, here's a fellow traveler. So I asked him if he could help me find people from that community that would be, interested first of all, and willing to, let's say, go through on-the-job training, OSHA trainings, the kind of things you have to do in order to get some credentials. So we started down that road, and I would say that although it was personally a good experience for me, because I I kind of got to surround myself with a crew of Black workers. I think they were not graduates of solar training programs, and so they were learning. We poured a lot of concrete, frankly, for ground mount systems, and then some of them became more involved in, let's say, rooftop systems, and that was pretty organic. But one of the things that we found was that there was a big culture clash, and that was something that I'm still kind of reeling from. Because it just, in terms of insurance requirements, people following the rules, not smoking on the roof, and those kind of things, I had a hard time kind of I felt like I was caught between my managers who wanted people to toe the line and my workers who basically said, I'm on a roof. I should be able to smoke a cigarette if I want. If I need to move a couch on the weekend, I should be able to use the company van to move a couch. Although for insurance reasons, they were not supposed to do that. And so I kind of got caught between, on the one hand, the business requirements and sort of formal requirements of a business. And as the CEO at that point, the business owner, needed to not get too far out of whack with what my HR person was telling me that we needed to toe the line. And so ultimately, we didn't keep any of them. And several of them found jobs in with other contractors in the industry. And so looking back, I kind of feel like that was, let's say, we provided an entry point into the industry for maybe a dozen people, and then now they all work for other contractors. When you talk, you mentioned a word in your introduction, class, and I think that my analysis of modern American classless society is that you could ask the wealthiest person in the United States, Jeff Bezos. So, what class do you belong to, Jeff? Oh, I'm kind of upper middle class. And you could ask the poorest person, the guy sleeping on the sidewalk in downtown St. Paul in the middle of the winter. Oh, what class are you? Oh, lower middle class. My critique of the United States, unlike Europe and other countries, is that everybody wants to think that they're middle class somehow, the great middle class, which means it fuzzes out that whole issue, and we tend to, I think, conflate race and class. When you get somebody out of the ghetto, really, the North Minneapolis, what serves for a ghetto here in the Twin Cities, anyways. One of the neighborhoods that we might call a ghetto, where somebody from Watts or Compton, California, might say, "Geez, that's a middle class neighborhood if I ever saw one." So it's all in what you compare to. I think that we conflate those things, and then it gets to be confusing. And so, if I were to do that 5-year period over again, I would say that we really need to educate ourselves here in the business on this, on the part of the staff. That's something that I, as the CEO who wanted to lead the staff down that road, needed to do a better job educating people about issues around class, so that people didn't confuse, behavior of black, let's say, crew members as being about being black.
That's a great point. That's a great point, Ralph. I come from also similar to you. My high school was not majority white. It was very diverse, and of the black kids, many of them were from professional upper middle class backgrounds. His dad's a professor. Her dad is a lawyer. But there's also plenty of really poor kids, and there's a huge difference just within. You couldn't stereotype and say the black kids, because there's definitely different groups of black kids. And now here I am in Appalachian, Ohio, surrounded by white people. I think Athens County is 99% plus white, but we've got serious class issues and serious endemic multi-generational poverty that a lot of people don't really think about. So it was intentional that we're focused on issues of class along with color and background, and even the immigrant story is a great part of America, and it has with it a lot of issues and a lot of nuance that people will probably be disappointed and frustrated if they don't take into account. Just like sounds like you are in hindsight, looking back at your experiment, your early mover experiment, and trying to be more inclusive and have a more diverse workforce, would have benefited from your hindsight today.
Actually, another dimension to that 5-year period that I will point out is that in 2009, when the Department of Labor and Industry declared that photovoltaic installation is electrical work, basically, I was involved in getting some legislation to help create market, and saw how helpful the IBEW was, and so I decided, okay, well, if I'm going to keep doing photovoltaic installations, I better become an electrical contractor. And so had an electrician on staff, and well, we needed to have a master electrician at that point. So I've made arrangements with master electricians to use their license and their help. But during that period where I was hiring people out of North Minneapolis to fill out our crew, as an IBEW signatory, I thought that a valid pathway for these guys into the solar business was to organize them into the apprenticeship program. And so I remember one job where I had a union organizer sitting in the room with my crew, and he was trying to get them interested in signing up for the apprenticeship program. And I think that to them it appeared like indentured servitude, which I just said it just created a sour attitude. They didn't want to go there. These guys, I could see that they were envisioning being surrounded by 50-year-old white racist electricians for 5 years. Did not look appealing, and so we couldn't get them to bite. I would have loved to have been, responsible for organizing some black solar workers into the IBEW apprenticeship program and giving them, a portal into a career as an electrician. But just I could see that there were attitudes on both sides. The union didn't really want me to be, it's like doing an end run around their process, and then they didn't really want to get involved in the union in that way, and so that was a bitter failure for me. So combining the union membership with having crewing up with people from the black community just didn't pan out. Really, if you look at systemic racism, and I know that's probably a bad word right now. I mean, I see that people who are really trying to deconstruct racism in the United States have gone to other language. But when you look at the systemic aspects, I think that union experience looked like a lesson in recognizing that there may be hesitations and attitudes on both sides of the equation that one has to deal with.
Yeah, yeah. The unions are really changing quickly. As you know, there's a huge shortage of quote unquote blue collar workers, and maybe this has something to do with the class discussion we had earlier, and perceptions about what success looks like. Um, but a lot of the unions are really starting to up their game in terms of recruiting and making women and people of color and different backgrounds more, welcome or feel more welcome, genuinely. And not everybody, but plenty of IBW folks I've spoken with will admit that there's a history there that they've got to overcome and some serious challenges. And I'm happy that I'm seeing some progress.
Yeah, another issue that I think was difficult for our HR people or maybe our managers to deal with. Again, I would say this relates more to class than color. Definitely, maybe it's all about class, is wealth. That I was drawing people who, maybe because of family background, just because of, and I'd say that, the long arc of Jim Crow, the impact of Jim Crow, where families of color have not been able to accumulate wealth to the same extent that white families have been able to. When hiring somebody who doesn't have a car for a construction job, that just puts an extra burden on everybody on the crew. People have to give rides. And if you have too much of that, you have a lot of the use of Uber and taxis and people showing up late because they, had to something about their kids that hadn't gotten worked out. And those kind of things. It's like any one thing would not be a big deal, but it's like death by a thousand paper cuts. Then a lot of those things that I think just go back to stolen wealth, stolen opportunity to generate wealth. They were not coming from a situation where they had the resources, yes, and cushion, to overcome, any one of those problems, lack of a car or what have you. And so it was, yeah, that was another thing that made it hard for my managers and then the HR person.
We've got this myth of, we're all middle class. There's a famous quote, I'm going to get it wrong, but um, I think they're talking about, the most Americans think that they're temporarily, what was the word? Temporarily inconvenienced millionaires, as a way to explain why a lot of people vote against their class issues, is because we've got this great story of, we're all about to be successful. And if I work hard, I'll be successful. If I have a good idea, I'll be successful. And to a large extent, that is the American dream. And that's, one of the reasons I started a business and was an entrepreneur. But many of us, after looking hard in the mirror after George Floyd's murder and this big awakening that white America and white middle class America has and is still going through, um, my perspective's changed. And I'm really more aware now than I ever was about what I call the tailwinds in my life that open doors for me and just make me more likely to be successful. And the headwinds faced by many people that work harder than me and are likely smarter than me, but because of the color of their skin or their background, their childhood experience, don't have you know the same outcomes. And it's really turned my own ideas about meritocracy and entrepreneurial, egalitarianism on its head. And I'm much more aware of that. And it sounds like you're pointing out some of this stuff that, you hire a white kid from the suburbs, he's probably going to work out and he's certainly going to have an easier path. If you hire a black kid from northern Minneapolis, it's going to be a lot harder for him to be successful for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, actually hire a farm kid. Isn't that the wisdom? Hire a farm kid, black or white.
We've got a lot of good farm kids. Yeah, and I tell you, there's something to be said about the hardworking rural farm worker ethic. And I've also been told, don't hire philosophy grads and expect them to be productive up on a hot roof. In the solar industry, we've got a lot of tree hugging, idealistic folks attracted to our industry. But in general, PhDs don't last long carrying modules up a panel, up a ladder.
Well, I think that the best placed philosophy grads I've seen in the construction industry is your finer cabinetry and trim details, not lugging solar panels
Yeah,
up
yeah.
3 levels of scaffolding.
Well, here we are stereotyping, Ralph. So it takes a while to break that habit, and I bet you we'll maybe get some phone calls from happy, hardworking philosophy grads that are digging holes with the best of the farm
Well,
boys.
and one of the
Um,
things when I used to really love hobnobbing with and like riding for an hour or two, job site with my black crew because, one of the realities that I'm given to understand about being black is it's impossible to get away from the race issue. White people, part of white privilege is being able to step away from it. Oh, I want to think about astronomy now. I want to think about, coin collecting. All these things we can like distract ourselves or inspire ourselves with. And so I enjoyed talking about astronomy and astrology and philosophy, with my black crew and giving them a chance to step aside from like the issues of race. So they weren't like having to deal with it, like at least for the day. That's something that I think recognizing that that a person is a whole human being, with a whole set of interests.
how did you get turned on to this way of thinking, Ralph? I mean, I think you'd probably self-identify as not being your average white upper middle class guy in terms of mindset and perspective. Is there? I mean, you mentioned your parents, and you mentioned your growing up in a more diverse area of.
Well, boy, don't get me started. When I was 5 years old, we were visiting some family down in Arizona. Okay, and I remember being at the Arizona State Fair. This was a formative experience, I think. One of those things that sort of sets your expectation and your direction and your expectation of other people in a direction early in life, right? So, um, down there at the Arizona State Fair, 5 years old, and I was watching a Navajo man do a sand painting, with different colors of sand. And I was fascinated by that. So he was explaining to me what some of the things were that, like, he was explaining about the what clouds look like when you have the whole horizon available to you, like you do in Arizona, most places. Clouds, they can take on the look of like beings that are coming over the edge of the world. So the firebird or the thunderbird, actually the thunderbird. So he was explaining that to me as he was parceling out the sand, and that stuck with me. I mean, just that 15-minute conversation of watching him, and I remember that because what it did was it set my expectations about what I could talk about with people, um, like Native American people, Black people, Latino, Latinx, Latina, um, and the range of history, philosophy, and as you pointed out, philosophy graduates. Well, this guy was definitely a history buff, right? Putting it into his art, and it was a different form of history than what we teach in our suburban grade schools and high schools, right? It's sort of a long view of history, the mythology. I'd like to talk a little bit about what I'm doing now with like the SolStar program. So I got called to do a feasibility study by one of my salesmen because he had made a deal with the Red Lake Nation up in northern Minnesota. Feasibility, okay, how much solar could we fit on the roofs of 10 of our, public buildings? How much of the load would that pick off? The kind of thing that we typically do when we're selling a commercial industrial system um, in the solar industry. And this was for an Indian tribe, however, a Native American tribe. And by the way, the word Indian, I don't like to use very much, although they officially are known as the Red Lake Band of Chippewa Indians. And so they've confused the issue by using it in what they call themselves. And typically the driver, for a business, a sale of a system is, um, okay, how much money is it going to save us? And, how long will it take to pay back? When are we going to hit break even for spending our money? Red Lake, on the other hand, taught me something about native values, because their driver is that they have a commercial fishery in Red Lake. They sell walleye all over the Midwest to restaurants and in some stores. And there's a slow buildup of mercury in the water because of the burning of coal
Mm.
out west, which they have no control over. And so what they want to do is to exert some control in shutting down those coal plants and save their fishery. And so by going solar, their calculation is not uh, how much money are we going to save and what's the payback. The payback is saving the fishery. Now, if more people would think that way about the planet we live on and less about their pocketbook, we'd probably have, let's say, some different directions the solar industry would be going in, and maybe better relationships between utilities and the solar industry, in general. We had the problem of figuring out how to finance these. Corporate money, which was expected, did not show up. So I was at a conference at McAllister College and found out about crowdsourced funding being used in some communities. I think the Black community in South Detroit, uh, and a community in Atlanta, and where corporate money was not showing up at Red Lake as expected. So I talked with the chairman of the tribal council, and we agreed that we'd try crowdsourced funding for Red Lake. And I hired an attorney who has, been a leader in helping the solar community in Minnesota develop the suite of contracts for third-party financing over the last couple decades. And so we developed a model that would make it possible to use crowdsourced funding for the debt side, and then my equity to start the ball rolling to finance some of these things, these 10 public buildings. So we got started, and we're actually just finishing up the second one now. And so what that's done is it's given some momentum. So now other conversations about how to raise funds are showing up. And of course, there's money coming down from the Department of Energy for solar on tribal lands, this kind of thing. But really, one of the things I've noticed in that process is that the Red Lake Nation itself needs an energy planning group, in the community, so that they can actually move towards energy sovereignty, so that they can, as these systems that I'm financing and will eventually sell to them once I've used the tax credits, can so that they will be in a position to know, what to do with them, how they can maybe develop a a municipal utility based on clean energy. And this actually is how the tribe will be able to exert influence, a larger influence than just in its own community, on surrounding communities and tribal communities around the Midwest, to make those coal plants out west unnecessary on a faster timeline. So really, it's the financing that I've always, in 30 years of being in business, I've always been sitting on the other side of the table from the underwriter and the finance, the people who were going to get the loans or were going to get the money together. And then I was totally dependent on them, whether we were going to have a project. But in this setting, I feel like I have a sense of agency in being able to, start from nothing and put together a financing plan that I uses my money in let's say a very parsimonious way, so that I can extend it pretty far, and then it passes along to the tribe a sense of agency to them in their own future, their energy future. So I think this has stimulated a lot of conversations about electric vehicles and, the electric infrastructure, how much they will use propane, and maybe going all electric. Those kind of conversations that we're having elsewhere, I think, are showing up there now. Um, and so in the Soul Star program, which is what we started talking about, actually before the podcast started, um, I'm taking that finance model and then adapting it for the Black community in North Minneapolis. And so the goal is to create a portfolio of residential and small commercial installations that creates enough of a market space for local contractors up there to get involved um, and get some interest in the different aspects of the solar industry, so that we have what you're calling solar as a platform for economic development.
Wow, I love it. Uh, uh, my brain's kind of straining right now to try to understand how complicated all this must be and how much time it must take. I think that's one of our shortcomings as a society, along with many other things, is we've got a really we're very impatient. And it sounds like some of the projects that you're describing have taken years and years to get traction and to start having
Yeah,
making an
they
impact.
when we decided to stop waiting for the corporate money to show up because of a tax scheme that really was no, nobody wanted to stick their neck out first, so nobody did. Um, the chairman of the tribal council, when I talked with him, he said, "Well, while we're waiting to beach a whale, we might as well go catch a few fish." I thought that was, yep, you summed it up there, my friend. You summed it up. Um, so the decision to do the crowdfunding meant basically going to my church community among the Quakers and Unitarians and Presbyterians. Church people who are interested in the solar and racial justice. Well, I'm sure all are, but the ones that really Interfaith Power and Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light connects with a segment of those. So they've been my marketing partner, helping to get the conversations going. But it took a long time to get the first little bit of people willing to stick their neck out and say, yeah, yeah, Ralph, I'll loan you some money. And so my payback plan for them, is something that I will feel that the finance model is successful, not when I've taken the money and built the project, but when I've paid back the money and the project has been operating, all the while.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then having been able to sell it to the tribe for a discount that involves passing along the benefit of the uh, tax credits to the tribe in that sale, so that then they will own the asset. And similarly, the homeowners in the Soul Star program in North Minneapolis, after tax law allows, will own the asset. And so building wealth
Love it.
in the community through the ownership of solar. And the first pushback I got from somebody in North Minneapolis was, well, but community solar makes it possible. Community solar gardens and subscriberships make it possible for a wider variety of people to access solar. So why would you go down this road? And I'm going, well, first of all, um, gee, are you saying that white people can go down the road of ownership of solar, but that black people shouldn't? And immediately the person that brought that up just said, no, 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 that's not what I meant. And I'm going, well, then can tell me why you wouldn't want to build wealth in the black community through ownership of solar. And I think we kind of cleared that hurdle pretty quickly, putting it in that light.
Well, a lot of people don't understand community solar model, but I kind of can quickly summarize it to say it's renting or subscribing to solar that you don't actually own or that's owned off site. You have a share in a community garden, maybe, versus truly owning your own asset and building equity, which is the point that you were making.
Subscribership was a concept I think created, if not by the Minnesota legislature, then pretty soon before it was discussed at the legislature, because it's a new relationship. Where the person does put money in, but they're not buying ownership. They're they're buying they're actually paying back the third party who has purchased the system itself. And so they're on a payment plan by subscribing. So it's a three-way deal. By subscribing, by paying the owner of the system, they're getting the benefit of a credit on their utility bill.
Yeah. Well, at the risk of avoiding going down a solar project finance rabbit hole, I want to steer us back towards the theme of uh, that we started with about solar for all and issues of equity and class and justice. And thank you for your work that you've done, and also for being vulnerable here, and coming on the show not to brag about how great you are and how many super successes you've had, but I think we started the conversation with you talking about what didn't go as well as you thought, even despite your best intended, your good intentions. Um, Thanks for being vulnerable, Ralph, and thanks for sharing your kind of accumulated wisdom and experiences with our listeners. I'm hoping that there's folks out there that are going to be inspired by this, and that might think, hey, wait, we could crowdfund for this. Crowdfunding's gotten that much more mainstream and more, it feels more safe to a lot of people. There's platforms for it, et cetera. We're seeing some crowdfunding helping to make some projects in low income communities happen. Um, so this has been super. We're going to shift it over to the Solar for All Better Together section of the pod. And this is a place where our guests can share wisdom and ideas with our listeners. The first subject is basically the note and promote, where you can talk about a book or an author that you're excited about and why.
I I read a lot, so it's kind of hard to narrow it down. But I think two books that come to mind: A Native History of the United States. Maybe it's Native People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, who's a Native historian. It's kind of hard to read because she chronicles a lot of the really crummy things that European Americans have done to Native Americans over the years. But I think that it's good to know your history.
Mm,
Anybody that really wants to understand what the some of the foundational things or some of the foundation for what's going on today and how decisions are made about life and, let's say, solar potential in Native communities. That would be a good book to read. Another one that I is a personal favorite is Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, a black author. Really helped me understand what a black um, man growing up in the 20th century struggles with in terms of, being the whole person and recognized for being a whole person.
right. Rather than being defined primarily or first and foremost by
Yep.
the color of their skin. And
And I think that if I had read that before I started hiring people from the black community, and then shared that with my staff, we would have had probably a different outcome.
that's great. Knowledge is power, and those are two powerful books. We've had links to them in the show notes. Um, and then, how about a piece of advice or wisdom that you would like to pass along to our listeners, Ralph?
Well, this is if your listeners here are primarily people in the solar community, I would say that my take on, especially when we get into adding energy storage to extend the usefulness of solar, we really need to learn the language of capacity planning that utility engineers use. We'd have much better conversations, and we would understand a lot more about how utilities think and be able to engage in joint energy planning, which I think is what where we have to go.
we're going to get another deep dive down the rabbit hole, but this is great. I'd never really thought about the kind of cross-cultural issues involved in interacting between the solar folks and the utility planning community that have kind of evolved on separate tracks and almost on separate planets. And you're right, capacity planning and um, instantaneous power, or KW, is the driver, not KWH, which is what you and I primarily focus on, more at the homeowner level than on the CNI level. Well, let's lighten it up a little bit, and we'll go to the Better Together 1+1 playlist. And this is for all you digital streaming music listeners out there. This is on Spotify, Pandora, and Apple. Give us 2 songs if you can. You narrowed it down to 2 books. Let's narrow it down to 2 songs. One that's an old classic, and maybe something new that's
Well,
popped
an
into
old
your ears
classic.
lately.
Let's say there was a group of people that I think started out in Massachusetts, but they were, this is in the 1970s. They were wearing the bright tie-dye T-shirts, and they were, yeah, right, the peace sign, called Bright Morning Star. I think they might have started out in Vermont or Massachusetts. They came through St. Paul and stayed at our commune, actually, so I got to know them a little bit. But they had a song that I hear every now and then called the Solar Anthem. I bet you'll find it if you dig a little bit on YouTube.
Now, this is great. This is great. Well, that's your classic. How about something fresh and new? What's the latest thing you're?
I know I'll think of something 10 minutes from now after we've hung up, and doggone it, why can't I think of it now?
No worries. You gave us 2 books when I asked for 1, so we'll give you a buy on the 2 songs part of it. Sounds good. We'll retrofit it. At the end of the day, though, this has been a delightful podcast, Ralph, and I appreciate you and everything that you're doing for solar, and as well as just for people, for humanity, and for your.
Yeah, I tell you what, to substitute for that song, I would like to substitute another book. Ages of Gaia by James Lovelock. It's basically, as an atmospheric scientist, he chronicles the development of the atmosphere of planet Earth and the chemical processes and the amazing interaction between life on Earth and thermodynamics of a planet. And it's important to know that stuff as we move into an age of climate chaos.
Yeah, sadly enough, those old truths that pretty much describe the miracle of this rock in space that can support life are also the same truths that we need to know about as we navigate the big changes that we're involved in now. We'll take a 3rd book instead of 2 songs. And thank you, Ralph, and thanks to our listeners. If you like this content and want to spread the word, please not only subscribe, but ask your friends and others that would be interested in this pod to subscribe. Share us on your socials, on LinkedIn. And remember, you can find show notes for this episode as well as all the other episodes at www.solarforall.show. Thank you to our sponsor, Third Sun Solar. And if we are going to be successful in the fight against climate change, we're going to need everyone on the team. And this podcast is focused on building those bridges and learning those lessons together as we build a brighter tomorrow.